Hello and welcome back to another Monster Monday, a series where I draw a creature from D&D and I talk about its lore and its history and what it's like to fight in-game as well. In these videos I like to use suggestions, your suggestions actually, for monsters that you'd like to see me draw or hear me talk about and explore the lore and mythology of. So if while you're watching this, a monster from D&D's past, or maybe from one of its sister books, strikes you as something that you'd really like to see reimagined or have the mythology explored of, then make sure to leave that down below in the comments section so I can get around to it at some point. The 10 most popular suggestions, those who come up most frequently in the comments section, are the ones which I give to my patrons over on Patreon every single month. And my wonderful patrons not only financially support me and help me make these videos every single week, but they also then vote on which ones of your suggestions they'd like to see in what order. So if you would like to help me make these videos and you'd like a little bit more control over what you see from me, then I'll make sure to leave a link down below in my description box where you can find my Patreon page. But if not, I hope you'll still enjoy today's video, which is all about the Purple Worm, an absolute D&D classic, which was first suggested by Sweeps, a long-time viewer of the channel. So thank you so much for your fantastic suggestion, Sweeps, and let's get started with today's video. Walk without rhythm, and we won't attract the worm. It'll go to the thumper. The Purple Worm first appeared in December 1997's Monster Manual for 1st edition, and was, as the quote above was clearly pinched from, directly inspired by Frank Herbert's 1965 sci-fi epic Dune, where, on the boiling deserts of the planet Arrakis, cataclysmically enormous armoured worms, known as the Shai-Hulud, or the Immortal Ones, to the citizens of the planet, consistently sift through the endless sands of their world, digesting and crushing minerals and crystals, converting them into the most precious resource in the galaxy, the spice melange, worth more to the people who inhabit the setting of Dune than gold, diamonds, or even life itself, for its almost magical sensory-enhancing properties. Just like the sandworms of Dune, purple worms in Dungeons & Dragons are absolutely gargantuan creatures, on average reaching 24 meters in length, which, to put that in perspective, if you think of a blue whale, the largest creature known on Earth, they're said to reach 33 meters in length. So although, as a DM, I tend to introduce these creatures far more like their building-like size featured in the Dune series, where they're said to reach something along the lines of 450 meters long, these things are almost the size of a blue whale. Although that's a little bit unfair on my players, because if I did use the Dune measurements and consider them 450 meters long, then they'd be just a little bit longer than the Grand Canyon. But hey, this is a creative game, it's fun to play with your imagination, and it's somehow even more fun for a player to take down a creature that's that absolutely massive. So remember that in your D&D world, purple worms can be any size you like. And it really helps to have fantastical structures and creatures that utterly dwarf players to enhance this sensation. But admittedly, a Grand Canyon-sized creature can be a little bit more intimidating. Now, unlike Arrakis, Dungeons & Dragons doesn't actually have anything quite like the spice melange in the Dune series, at least not canonically. However, just like the inspiration, purple worms of D&D are said to be constantly excreting precious metals and gems that aren't digested or perhaps are compressed in the immense pressures of their stomachs as they travel through the earth, constantly searching for food. Just like most worms, Dungeons & Dragons purple worms don't have any eyes as such, although some editions of D&D have included eye-like structures and sometimes even ears on their slimy bodies. Instead, purple worms tend to sense vibrations through the sand and the rock deep beneath the earth, using their 30-foot blind sight and 60-foot tremor sense. They feel the vibrations on the surface that move more regularly and feel like the activities of living creatures, so they can carve a path deep below the world until they can find such creatures to consume in one mighty gulp as they dive out of the earth. In a special rule called Tunneler, these mighty worms are said to be able to travel through rock almost as easily as they manage to sift through sand, leaving a 10-foot diameter tunnel in its wake, which is not utterly surprising due to this creature's strength score of 28, or its similarly impressive 22 constitution. When directly beneath its prey, it burrows or tunnels straight up through the ground and is said to be able to swallow even something the size of a horse whole in a single bite. I imagine to the worm, this is intended to be something like a stealthy tactic, a bit like the remorhaz that I covered in an earlier Monster Monday video, which lies in wait under the snow and leaps up to surprise its prey. However, due to the gargantuan and massive size of this creature, it's likely that anything on the surface would get quite a severe warning in advance as the earth will begin to shake beneath their feet, not unlike a very intentioned earthquake approaching them. If someone is unfortunate enough to wait around to discover the origin of this sentiently moving earthquake, they are met with the challenge rating 15 monstrosity, who gets to make a potentially insanely life-ending 2 attacks per round. The first and most predictable attack, I guess, is a bite, which deals 3d8 plus 9 piercing damage and forces creatures to make a dexterity saving throw. Those unlucky enough to be unable to dodge out of the way of this very well telegraphed attack and fail their dexterity saving throw are swallowed whole, wherein they are restrained and blinded as they become slowly digested by this massive creature, taking 6d6 acid damage every turn that they remain inside this mighty beast's stomach. The only way to avoid passing through the other end of this worm and becoming just more spice melange, or in D&D, golden jewels, is to somehow manage to deal 30 damage to the beast from the inside despite your confinement as you lay compressed in its digestive tract, at which point the creature must need to succeed on a DC 21 Constitution saving throw, which if it fails, it'll be forced to regurgitate you. Otherwise you must simply wait until you are digested down to your base ingredients by its potent stomach acids, or wait for the creature to die, at which point you can crawl your way to freedom through its massive intestines. The other and slightly more surprising attack that this creature gets to make each round is with its tail stinger. It has a massive barb at the very end of its body, which deals 3d6 plus 9 piercing damage, which is accompanied by a further 12d6 poison damage if players fail a Constitution saving throw. In The Ecology of the Purple Worm, written in 2001 for issue 282 of Dragon magazine, Jonathan M. Richards reveals a startlingly different relationship to water that purple worms in D&D have to their inspiration, which might be a different means of attacking these creatures depending on how your DM chooses to play or imagine these creatures. In the Dune books, the sandworms of Arrakis enjoy that desert environment primarily because it is so arid. Consuming water causes their metabolisms to speed up so quickly that they can die from it almost instantly. However, the Purple Worm article mentions that these creatures breathe through something not unlike osmosis, and must keep their skin moist at all times in order to properly oxygenate their skin and organs within. This is much more like the original wormy namesake. Most species of worms actually do breathe through their semi-permeable skin and require moisture in order for this transfer process to continue. They have no lungs as such, but their long and thin bodies provide enough surface area to make enormous contact with oxygen and thus properly respirate and oxygenate their organs through their skin. In the Ecology of the Purple Worm article, we're also told that just like earthworms, the purple worm can regenerate if cut in half, although there doesn't seem to be any reference to this in the actual stat block, at least for 5th edition, so it's definitely not like a troll's regeneration. Worms themselves, when cut in half, do tend to wriggle and writhe. I certainly remember as a kid being told that if a worm was cut in half it just becomes 2 worms. And while that's not strictly the case, they do wriggle and writhe. The one half that is cut off is still filled with, muscles and nerves which are still continuously firing, but it's definitely not alive. It's sort of like the death throes. But worms do have amazing regenerative properties, and the bit that is cut will seal itself to prevent infection. So I suppose if you wanted to have a slightly lower challenge rating purple worm encounter with your players, you could maybe use the stats of a remorhaz or something like that, and claim that a purple worm has been cut in half and simply healed itself. Maybe remove its ability to deal this pincer attack and only have the bite. It's only half the length, something along those lines. That still would seem like it fit quite well. Now we know that purple worms dwell primarily under the ground, and they're absolutely colossal creatures, which means in their tunneling, they are bound to encounter dwarves, drow, mind flayers, cloakers, and other creatures which dwell deep beneath the earth in D&D. So what do these creatures do about these massive tunneling monstrosities? Well, mind flayers and drow in the Underdark actually have a very special relationship with these creatures. They learn to work not necessarily in harmony, but to avoid attacks with them. Mind flayers will send out psionic vibrations, which are used to deter mind flayers, or perhaps will send out some of their slaves, their mind slaves, to go and wander predictably, diverting the attention of purple worms away from their massive colonies. The Fremen of Dune learn to walk unpredictably, like some of the desert creatures that have learned to survive and adapt on Arrakis, and thus manage to move across its surface without being noticed by the worms. I've introduced something similar in my own campaign setting, which I use for the drow. In my own campaign world, there's an entire, continent called Dape Gadir, which is where the drow live deep beneath the earth. There are enormous caverns, which are so massive that they rival a darkened surface land, and there lies the Obsidian Desert, an entirely pitch-black, shimmering desert, not unlike the Sahara in size, wherein, just like the Fremen of Dune, the drow learn to move unpredictably to avoid these creatures' attention, but also can train them, or rather, ride them perhaps without training. In Dune, these massive scaled beasts have very sensitive skin and flesh underneath their armour, and the Fremen have developed special riding equipment, which, if you are brave enough to run up alongside one of these massive sandworms, you can pry open one of these pieces of armour, something which might naturally happen quite regularly to these enormous worms. Sensing this new soft and delicate area of its body, the massive worm will coil itself, raising that unarmoured piece to the very, very top, so as not to get sand and rock inside and thus damage themselves further and avoid infection. The Fremen are able to hold on to their riding equipment as this worm coils this part above, because something without eyes, or thus any particular orientation in terms of its direction, doesn't really matter what way it's rotated, and this damaged, unarmoured piece becomes the top of the worm. If a Fremen is able to hold directly onto this riding equipment, they can ride this sandworm across the great deserts, and so too do my drow, riding in this black, glistening desert beneath the earth. Let me know if you do something similar in your campaigns. I'd love to see or hear about how the purple worms have managed to shape the environment of your planets, or if any creatures have any particular relationship to them. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I definitely did. Although this is something more of a simple drawing, these creatures are so intrinsic, so tied up in Dungeons & Dragons lore. They're just fantastic, and I'm really glad that I got a chance to draw them and talk about them, as well as my fascination with the Dune series. So I hope you enjoyed it too. If you did, please make sure to help the channel out by leaving a little like down below, maybe favoriting this video, and sharing it with the rest of your D&D party, because everything that you can do like that really helps this channel to grow, and helps YouTube to know if I'm doing a good job or not here. If you'd like to support the channel in a more personal way, and earn rewards, which include things like copies of all the illustrations that I do, just like this one here, then I'd urge you to head over to Patreon, where your contributions can help me actually make these videos every week. So thank you so much if you choose to do that. And in the meantime, make sure to move erratically if you're in any large spaces of Earth, or even arid deserts, just in case your DM has a purple worm encounter planned for you. And until next time, happy monster hunting.